Hello, you're watching the TelecomTV Summit on the Green Network and our panel discussion on ensuring a sustainable supply chain and ecosystem. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content. Now, what influence do telcos have over their partners and vendors if they are to achieve full end-to-end network sustainability? And why are current sustainability roadmaps so long? They often stretch into the next decade. Surely we could do better. Well, with the help of today's guests, we are going to find out. And joining me today are Cyril Pourrat, who is Chief Procurement Officer for BT, Fernando Valero, Global Supply Chain Director for Telefónica, Saima Ansari, Senior Partner Manager at Deutsche Telekom and the NGMN Project Lead for Green Future Networks, and Tony Darcy, who is Head of ESG Enablement and Communications at Nokia. Hello everyone, very good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in this discussion. So, first thing I'd like to ask you is, why should a telco, a CSP, be concerned with the sustainability of the entire supply chain? Isn't it enough just to focus on their own operations? Fernando, as one of our telco guests today, what's your perspective? Why does a telco need to focus on the entire supply chain?
Thank you, Guy. I think the last couple of years prove that we are not longer isolated forms. No, I think it's not anymore supply chain by your own company, but it's more an ecosystem where you are using. No, I mean the full ecosystem of what we have. It is very important. No, I mean. And not only for sustainability. When we see what happened with the COVID, we see what happened with the semiconductor crisis. I think the companies that has been successful on managing the supply chain and having the right resilience and so on has been mainly because they have trust on the full ecosystem. And there's no difference for the sustainability. I think sustainability is an intrinsic part of all these needs that we have in supply chain to manage all the new risk and the new normality, as they call. But and I think that's why it's no longer looking at your kind of enterprise resource planning, what we used to do. Is more ecosystem resource planning, what we need to focus on. No? So it's more relying on the collaboration that we have with all of our partners, both upstream and downstream. And we will see that it is as important that you have your house in order is to have your full ecosystem in order, because we are competing with the full ecosystem, not anymore with your own company.
Okay, thanks very much, Fernando. So, Saima, it's a case then that things have changed, things have moved on. It's now more integral then, is it, to a telco's operations?
Just adding on to what Fernando also said as a part of the answer of this question, first of all, we of course have to get our house in order, which is our own operations, which are basically categorized under the scopes 1 and 2. And many operators who have already switched to renewable electricity as a part of their operations, and they have almost achieved their scope 1 and 2 net zero goals, or are about to achieve in the next couple of years. And the third part, which is the scope 3, which basically comprises of everything that we buy and everything that we are selling to our customers, that is scope 3, both up and downstream, actually consists of whatever is happening in our supply chain. And this actually makes us also obliged to make sure that our entire supply chain is also moving in the same direction as we as an operator. So in order to achieve our own goals, we need to make sure that our suppliers also have a similar goals, so that because we are all a part of the same journey, and we will be able to achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves only if and only our suppliers also have set them up. So that's why it's all going hand in hand together, basically.
Thank you, Saima. And coming across to Cyril, you've been involved in procurement for a long time with a number of companies. You've got a lot of experience in this area. So why now? Why are we looking more and spending more time looking at sustainability across the supply chain? Why is it important to you?
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. First, at BT, we connect for good. And when we're saying we connect for good, it's not just obviously about the services that we're providing to our customer, but it's as well the way we are impacting the society and all in all the dimension. And Saima was just mentioning the scope 3, which is obviously under our remit on the supply chain side. But it's clear that for us, when we're talking with our customers, so they're expecting us, first of all, to deliver the good product and services that we are doing, but as well that we are taking care of the overall planet. Because you've seen that, especially after the COVID, or it was already the case a bit before, but especially after the COVID, people are even more and more sensitive to that. And for us, it's not something which is new. It's something that since 1992, we took our first commitment when it's come to reducing our carbon footprints, taking care of the planet, basically. And when we look at, Saima was mentioning and Fernando was mentioning as well, so supply chain is key because the services that we are providing to our customer are mainly built on products which are provided to us from our suppliers. So that's the reason why when we look at that, it's top of the agenda of BT, top of the agenda of our customer, top of our agenda of our stakeholders, if I make it more globally. And our suppliers are playing a key role into basically the services that we are services and goods that we are providing to our customers. So partnering with our vendors is key, making sure that our full ecosystem, as Fernando was mentioning, is fully aligned with our objective. It's key as well for us. And what I would like as well to mention is not just only the big ones, the big names that we know, and I know that we have one of them with us tonight, but it's also all the very small suppliers that we're working with. For example, in the UK, we can provide to any of the SMEs in the UK, they can access to the renewable energy at a cost which has been negotiated by BT. So that's the reason why we are taking extremely care of this topic, because it's, again, so a bit our tagline, so we connect for good. Supply chain is key because that's, most of what we are in terms of CO2 emissions, so a lot of them are coming from our scope 3, so from our supply chain, and supply chain again, so on its overall ecosystem, the big ones, the small ones. The big ones tend to be a bit more aligned with us by constructions, and the small one, we are doing everything that we can to help them, so really reaching these targets as well.
Thank you very much, Cyril. And Cyril, you just announced one of your big suppliers is Nokia, and Tony, that leads me nicely into you. Can we have your perspective on why we're looking at this more holistically as a whole supply chain issue?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons why. I think most big vendors anyway have been looking at their supply chain for a long time, but your supply chain is also a great source of your innovation that will drive change in climate innovations. So when we work with the PC board manufacturers, and they reduce the energy used to produce a board by something like 50% through innovation and through changes in processes, then you get to the situation where through your supply chain, innovation is driving the change necessary to bring environmental benefit. It also brings operating expenditure benefit and all sorts of other financial benefits. The other reason for it is, of course, you're as strong as your weakest link. It's not called a supply chain for no reason. It's a chain. And the chain always breaks at the weakest link. When now you are seeing what I call the perfect storm of ESG, which is every component of society and business is moving in a certain way. So you have political unrest, you have investors looking at how they can ensure not just risk, but opportunity from sustainable development. And also you're seeing, because of things like the pandemic, that those who survived best the pandemic were those who were more sustainable in the first place. So you have all of these things going on, as well as, and this is mostly because we are one step away from the end user, you see consumers driving the need as well. So all of these things are happening, and really that's why we're looking through the supply chain. Because like was said, the big suppliers are pretty much close to how the operators are working already and have been for a number of years. We did our first environmental report in 1997, if I remember correctly. So, there is a history there already of doing this. It's now urgency that's coming from the situation as well.
Great, thanks very much, Tony. And Fernando, did you want to come back in? You start us off on this answer. Did you want to come back in with some extra comments there?
I think the discussion has been fantastic so far, no? But I think we should not only focus on, as we say, scope 3, that we are also working on that, as it was said by our colleagues, no? But it's also about why the supply chain, the entire ecosystem is important, no? When we are talking about circularity also, we need to ensure that from the very beginning, not only our first tier, like the Nokias and so on, but also, I think Tony was mentioning the PC board manufacturers and so on. We need to ensure that from the beginning of the design, we are already taking into account all the concepts that we need for circularity, no? Because at the end, we are closer to the customer, no? We as an operator, we are very, very close to the customer. So we are the one that we need to ensure circularity at the very end, but we can ensure that circularity unless that is very well designed from the very beginning. No? So hence, we need to ensure that the full ecosystem is not about a concept, it's a way of doing things. No? So it's how we change our processes, how we change our mentality, and how we, from the moment that things are born to be circular already from the beginning. No? So it's not only about the greenhouse emissions that are very, very important, and we, like BT mentioned, and so we are working on measuring our full supply chain, and supply chain has a big impact, more than 50% of the impact on the scope 3, but from the full company. But it's also how you ensure that every single service that we provide to our customers, all the operations that are running those services are well thought from the beginning with the circularity in mind.
Yeah, Fernando, good points there, and correctly identified that it's all about the customer at the end of the day, and they're the people we're engaging with. We've got long supply chains behind us, but they're the people who are engaging with directly. Cyril, let's come across to you for some extra comments here.
Yeah, no, and I really like what Fernando said, because when it comes to circularity, so I'm sure that Fernando and Saima as well, so that there's a lot of people which are already refurbishing a lot of product. I'm thinking about hubs, IPTV, set-top box, handsets as well. But it's interesting because we are not, or at least on the carrier side, we're not great at communicating on that. And we should be much more proud of what we're doing, because we are embedding circularity in the design, as Fernando was mentioning. So I know that we are all doing it, at least the three of us that are on this event tonight. We're all doing it on the design. We're all as well refurbishing this kind of product, but we should be a bit more proud, and we should tell our customer what we're doing. And I've seen that as well. So there's now a new trend which is emerging. So that's a kind of new retail store where buying refurbished products, it's like you've got almost the same customer experience than when you're buying a brand new one. And that's something that we have to put more emphasis in our communication, because we do it at scale. On top of that, we should do more. There's no doubt about that. But we should communicate as well more widely, and our customers should accept the fact that some of their products that we will provide to them are actually coming from the circular economy, because we took care of it properly.
Yeah, and that's a great trend that we're seeing there, Cyril. So that's really good to see. Quickly back to Fernando, and then we'll move on.
Okay, I think what Cyril mentioned is fantastic, but it's not only about customers. No, it's not only about the products. As Cyril said, we are starting to communicate in the different reports what are the volumes that we do for refurbished, for handsets, for customer premises equipment like routers, IPTV, and so on. But it's also about one of our core assets. No, it's our network. No, how do we ensure that we communicate what we reuse, how we work with the full, not ecosystem, only thinking about our supply chain, no, but also our partners. No, and I think getting into that idea of making sure that our network is also we are able to give a second life to our network in many cases is very, very, very important. No, because we remember it's not only product what we sell, it's a service. No, and we need to ensure that the service that we provide is also following the same standards of sustainability and the same standard of circularity that the product that we give to our customers. No, so same for our operations.
Great, thanks, Fernando. I do want to move on and look more at the supply chain, and in particular, Tony, I want to come to you first, because you talked about this being a chain, and you're only as strong as your weakest link there in that chain. Now, a number of telcos have committed to end-to-end sustainability goals and net zero, but the roadmaps that they're talking about and publishing to achieve this in their supply chain are often very long. They can take years and years, and some are going into the next decade. What is the reason for this? Why does this all take such a long time? And can we not make this happen maybe faster?
Well, I think first of all you have to look at what has happened, what your supply chain is. So let's take Nokia's supply chain. Last year, in 2021, we had 11,000 suppliers in our supply chain all around the world. And they are of different types of suppliers, of course, some just to run our business, some materials, some services, mostly, final assembly suppliers, all sorts of things like that. And then you also have to look at how deep to the supply chain you need to go. So going down to the mine level for minerals, going to the smelter level to ensure you're not buying conflict minerals. All of these things add layers of complexity. Now, what can change, of course, in the coming years is the use of technology to improve the transparency within those layers. But today, the biggest challenge is and remains the depth of the supply chain we have in ICT, the transparency in ICT, and the supply chain. And then also, how do you handle that from a personnel capacity, workforce perspective? And it's not just about, the greenness of the supply chain. You also have all the social aspects as well that you have to take care of. On top of that, I would say a couple of other things. I'll give an example. So we started with CDP supplier engagement more than 10 years ago with 60 suppliers. And of course, you look at where you have the greatest impact and where you can have the greatest impact. So you look at your biggest suppliers, where you have the biggest spend, the greatest risk, etc., from a geographic perspective. But then also you have to spend a lot of time building capacity and capability and knowledge within those supply chain. Because sometimes once you start to go further and further down the supply chain, you may be dealing with a supplier that has 30 employees. How do you ask the same level of paperwork, information, all of those things from a supplier that has 10,000 employees and one that has 30? The capability and the understanding of what is needed is also not there in many cases. So, for example, when you go to the supply chain, what data do you want? How do they find that data? How do they measure? How do they record and report the data? How do they set a target based on the data? Much of that is unknown as you go further down the supply chain, how to do those things. And until you know what data you have in your supply chain, you can't really cut your emissions, cut the energy use, improve on the processes without knowing what's there. So you spend a lot of time, I can tell you, we went from 60 10 years ago to around 400 now, which is the majority of our spend today. But it takes that amount of time for that reason. What I hope for is that actually some of the new technologies like blockchain will help us speed that process up and accelerate and make it more possible to see deeper into the supply chain more easily.
Great, thanks, Tony. We're going to look in more detail at blockchain later in the summit, actually. Be interesting to pick up and find out more about that. But certainly, my takeaway from that, what you've just said there, is it's a huge undertaking. There's so many different companies involved at different sizes. It's a massive undertaking. Saima, let's come across to you first for your comments on just why this is such a tricky operation.
Let's take it the same topic with the similar challenges about the data availability, granularity, skills available, and also the human resources which need to be there in order to fill up the information which needs to be in place in order to understand where and how we can reduce the impact on our supply chain. From a telco point of view, maybe I can just give an example from Deutsche Telekom, operating, of course, on both sides of Atlantic, so having subsidiaries in Europe plus US. We have thousands of suppliers, and engaging with those suppliers and bringing them on the same pace as us in order to understand what we need, what kind of disclosure we need in terms of carbon impact is already one of the biggest challenge. And to answer your question directly, so you said, why is there a whole decade when you just set up the targets for your own operations within the next couple of years, but for the supply chain and for the scope 3, you go ahead to 2040 and so on. One of the basic thing is that to just wrap our mind around the topic that all these carbon emissions are actually beyond the boundary of Deutsche Telekom, as an operator. So in order to make a change which is not a part of your company or not within your organizational boundaries, you need to have multiple sets of alignments with all different stakeholders involved. And these stakeholders, of course, primarily are from the supplier side, but also from the customer side, because we cannot forget that because of the whole downstream topic. I think Tony has very well elaborated the challenges from the supply chain point of view in order to understand where we are and where we need to go. There are a lot of different gaps which we need to fill in order to make sure that we are achieving our targets. One critical aspect which I always want to highlight is that there is a lot of education which goes into such things when it comes to either the stakeholder alignment or to letting our customers know what needs to be done in order to move towards more environmentally sustainable services and products. And I think in one of the previous questions, this was highlighted. I think from BT that we should also be proud and talk a little bit more about what we already do and how we serve our customers. So how we build our networks, how much of circularity aspects we need to think about when we are building our networks, and how these services are provided to our end customers, and the equipment that they are using, for example, in their homes, or even the devices that they are using, what kind of impact is generated from them, and how we as operators can support them to reduce those impacts. So I think all of these things go hand in hand. So from the supplier point of view, plus the customer point of view, so that we are able to go on this journey together as an entire industry.
Thank you very much, Saima. And yes, and perhaps we also, as an industry, need to communicate just how difficult and challenging this is for us all. Fernando, let's come across to you for comments first.
I think what Tony said is one of the principles of supply chain. No? What you will measure, you cannot improve. No, so hence, I think from that perspective, also the macro trend that everybody is now looking at this topic on much more focused than it was a few years ago. No, I mean, as Tony said, all of our companies started many years ago, starting to work on a little bit on this one. Now this has become one of the key topics, and everybody in your entire ecosystem understands and wants to collaborate. No, so I think following again the same concept to make your supply chain ecosystem fully resilient to everything, you need to make sure that you make easier for everybody to report on sustainability, and also to make sure that you only ask the questions of what you can measure and what you can improve. And Telefónica, following that approach, we are looking for, in the next couple of years, to able to assess 100% of our supplier base. We have a supplier base a little bit bigger than our colleagues from Nokia, but we are working on that, and also working on with this science-based targets with our strategic suppliers, because those are the key ones for the scope 3. So we are going to be working on those ones for the next 2 to 3 years to make sure that we have all of them under science-based target, and with that being able to improve, because we will be committing to that, and we will always be improving. And then there will be a second fold that we can discuss later on, I think, about how you operationalize this. Because one thing is what you do for procurement, you can put this into your total cost of ownership, making sure that you take this into account in every single thing that you do, but then you need to make sure that, I think Saima mentioned about how you trace, how you have visibility. These are the same topics that we have for all the other these are the same problems that we have for all the other areas in supply chain. No? And then seeing how we work to maintain the resilience can help us also how to measure and to trace all these sustainability topics within the supply chain.
Oh, that's very interesting, Fernando. Thanks very much for those comments. And Cyril, you'd like to comment on this as well?
Yeah, I would like to comment because obviously there's as well a cost dimension to that. And that's something that we have to take into consideration. And we believe, and we're investing quite heavily into, I would say, technology. So we heard Saima saying that and Anthony saying that because the three of us actually, so we're using blockchain already to onboard our suppliers. And when we're onboarding our suppliers, we're asking questions related to ESG, obviously, everything which is covering the ESG scope. And it's interesting because we've got a pretty much almost the same database, blockchain based. So I can understand what kind of suppliers to need onboarding, what are their carbon footprints, and then so we can connect that with our own view. So that's I've got a lot of faith as well on technology, and technology will enable us really to track that properly and with a reasonable cost as well. And this kind of platform where across the industry and across the overall ecosystem to come back on the word which has been rightly used by Fernando. So if across the ecosystem, so we can connect our tool all together and being a bit more collaborative on this kind of platform, so we will be able to probably squeeze the 10 years that you were just mentioning at the beginning, squeeze it, and being sure that we have this kind of view across the overall ecosystem, across the overall supply chain, and the information will flow more quickly. And I was thinking about the 30 people company that Tony was mentioning at the beginning. Now you've got tools, you can do videos, you can have IoT, you can have maybe ask your suppliers to use their own mobile phone, you can develop application. And if everything is connected, it will be easier for us, A, to engage with this kind of suppliers, and two, as well, to properly collect at an affordable cost all the information which is needed to help the overall supply chain to work well together.
Thanks, Cyril. This is really all very, very encouraging. And it also leads into our next question very nicely. And that is, what practical steps should a telco take to ensure and mandate a green supply chain? And, just how big a challenge is this for telcos? And Saima, I'd like to come across to you first and get your views.
I think that in the previous answers, we have already touched on a couple of those practical elements which can be implemented in order to tackle this challenge. And let me just start with the first one, which we wanted to discuss and elaborate a bit on that. It's the part on the data availability. When Tony explained the example of how the suppliers changed, the number of suppliers changed participating in the CDP, which is the Carbon Disclosure Project, this is also one of the steps which we use, for example, to let our suppliers know that there is this platform which they can use and also support them in their journey to understand where their carbon emissions are generated and how CDP can be leveraged to actually make that data available for us as an operator to understand and also then report. So that's basically one of the first steps to take to understand and also to encourage the suppliers to disclose the carbon emissions. Once we have achieved this part, I think then the second element already comes in, which is about the data granularity, because very quickly you realize when you see all the data from different companies that there is a huge difference between when a company is actually delivering the input from their manufacturing units or from their own company versus what is coming from a certain database or based on a certain emission factor, based on certain estimations which the company did. So this data granularity becomes a very big topic, because without that you are not able to really compare and also identify the actions that you need to take. So apart from the data disclosure to the data granularity, the third thing which I can highlight as one of the very practical steps which also Deutsche Telekom is taking, and I'm really proud of this, that we are taking into account sustainability as a key criteria in our procurement decisions, which means that whatever we will buy as a company, sustainability will be evaluated next to the technical and commercial aspects, which is basically something which was never done before, at least at our company and also in our industry. We have always looked into the technology aspects. We have also looked into the commercial aspects. Power consumption has always been a big factor, and we look into it. But in addition to that, when you add sustainability and when you ask also the different elements, how a component is or a product is manufactured and how it is brought to you at your location where you are installing it, that plays a very big role, because this already gives a hint to the supplier that we are not just talking about disclosing some data or using it for some reporting, but we are making it real and making our decisions, our business decisions, based on this information. So this brings a bit more realistic numbers and facts to what we want to achieve. Apart from these three, one more thing which we have always at least driven from DT point of view, and I think from the other colleagues also in this call, is engaging with the suppliers as heavily as possible on these topics, and not only understanding what they are doing, but also supporting in their journey to set themselves the targets towards net zero. And one of the initiatives which I would like to highlight in this regard is our supplier development program, actually, which helped a lot of our suppliers, especially the small and medium companies, to understand within their own companies how and what can be improved and how the reporting should be done, which enables us in the long run to achieve our targets. Apart from that, I think one of the topics of education we have already addressed in this calls, which is also important because it's not only relevant to talk about it in the context of what you can deliver towards the customers or how much you support your suppliers, but also within your own organization, because we as a company also need to understand, and in order to evaluate something, we need to have a good understanding of what we are evaluating, and all of the different criteria when they come together, whether it's the data granularity aspect or whether it's understanding how to select a product based on sustainability criteria, all of these things are something which you need a proper skill and understanding about. So you need proper trainings regarding that if you want to make such decisions. So I think education is one of the critical part which definitely plays a role.
Absolutely, Saima. Thank you very much. Thanks for going through all those practical steps that Telcos could take. Fernando, let's come across to you for your thoughts on this.
I think what Saima mentioned is very, very relevant, no? And I think from a supply chain perspective, I mean, I'm pretty sure that every single supply chain officer or every individual working in supply chain always has in mind not how to make it more sustainable, but how to make it more efficient, more resilient, and at the same time, more sustainable, no? And that is what makes, it gives you what are the change. So when you are doing a change in your supply chain, you're changing, as I mentioned, the processes from the very, very, very beginning, no? And you need to ensure that everything goes according to that. In terms of practical steps, there's also one thing, no? Sometimes we tend to analyze the data too much before taking some account. I can give you an example of Telefónica. For some of our, it goes back similar to what Cyril was mentioned earlier, no? We do have a blockchain that is linking our tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 for some of our categories in terms of how do we run operation. Everybody is working into a single blockchain for our IPTV, for our routers, and for some of our external plant in many of our geographies. No? And that is not only to ensure that the operations is run as smooth as possible, as efficient as possible, but also how to ensure that every single source of the materials where those are coming is maintaining all the right sustainability. But it's not only in our incoming supply chain. No, we also link that in every time that we go either to our field service companies or we go to our customer premises or to the homes of the people where we provide the service to connect them or to give them the best TV possible. But also how when we recollect those materials and we give them a second life. No, we trace every single thing into that blockchain. And it's difficult sometimes when you think to do a big transformation when you start planning all the changes that you need to do. It's difficult when you want to start, no, because it's a very big program. But sometimes you can prove the movement by walking, no. So starting with a couple of categories, 3 categories, 4 categories, even that are core categories for you, makes a major difference. Now, when you start, you see that it's not so difficult, and then it's how you can bring those 2015 dates into 2030 or even earlier, as we are planning in Telefónica now. So I think it is important to use the technology to ensure that we can activate that in terms of active state. And you don't need to do the whole thing at the same time. No, you can work on the critical categories for you, and as I said, for us is network and customer premise equipment and so on. So working on those is what it helps you to start doing that change. No, so the change, in order to do the change, you need to start changing yourself, and every little helps, as one of the retailers of the UK used to say. No, so starting small, it will become bigger, but you just need to start.
Great, thanks very much, Fernando. There's a couple of other areas I wanted to cover off on this session, but I'm going to combine them into one question because they are so closely related. What real influence does a telco have over its supply chain? And also, what help can the industry as a whole give to telcos? Is there some kind of agreed program or timetable or blueprints they can follow, or do individual telcos have to work it out for themselves, which might be easier for the tier ones, but certainly if I was a tier 2 or tier 3, I'd be daunted by this task. Cyril, perhaps we could come across to you to round out our final set of responses.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. And I would say it's interesting because our industry, and when I'm saying industry, so it's the overall ecosystem, we've got a lot of professional associations and forums and all this kind of stuff. And maybe too many to a certain extent, and we should, given the size of the task that we have in front of us, we should really focus on the one that are maybe working the best, and maybe as well betting on those one. And I'm thinking, for example, the JAC, the Joint Audit Corporation. I believe that, well, it's not I believe, I know for a fact that the 3 of us on the carrier side tonight on this event are part of it. Started a few years back. We've got almost, I believe, more than half of the world population which have access to carrier services which are covered with the JAC, so ranging from AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile in the US up to us, but as well, as you said, tier 2, tier 3, because that's a platform which is easy for them to understand. It's a platform which is easy for them to access. They can as well benefit from the tier 1s, which have done I would say, great piece of work on all this kind of subject, so they can leverage the scale. Today, for example, such association is mainly open to carriers, maybe should be open to, why not, the ecosystem. You've got other associations as well, GSE, GSMA, why not? You've got a lot of that. Given the fact that it's front and center for all of us, I mean, the ESG topics. And just back on the question, that would be the previous question, thinking about a very practical step to take is that, first of all, the board and as well, so all the management team of the company are extremely focused on that. We issued our manifesto, but I'm sure that my colleagues as well on this event tonight have done exactly the same. So you see that it's front and center to everyone. So I mean, it's us on the supply chain, but it's also us, it's also our colleagues on the business, which are thinking about all this ESG dimension. And then after that, finding the right platform. We've got platforms, many platforms in the industry. I'm thinking about one that we have joined recently a year ago, BT, the JAC, and those platforms are really great assets that we should leverage to be able to tackle this kind of topic.
Great, thanks very much for that, Cyril. And yeah, it'd be great if we could open that up to the whole supply chain. That's interesting. Saima, let's come across to you because I know also you're heavily involved in NGMN.
Yeah. And just to answer your question, which is about giving a blueprint or some kind of guidance in terms of practicalities that can be adopted, there is actually one document that I can already refer. We lately published about the telco supply chain sustainability. This very well comprises the details, not only about where we stand and what the challenges are in our industry, which we kind of discussed already here in the session, but also it delivers in a form of an annex about what the companies can take into account when they are making their procurement decisions in order to make sure that whatever they are buying is also sustainable. So what are the key elements to look into when buying that, and how to evaluate them? So I can definitely refer to this document, which is available on the NGMN website, to look into it and to also share it with the broader range of suppliers, because this kind of work, first of all, it was of course driven by many of the operators and also the suppliers, because we didn't want to write something which only is beneficial from our perspective and we say, yeah, this is what we need and this is what should be available, but also what the suppliers are already doing. And I think that Tony already mentioned about a lot of efforts which the suppliers are already putting in terms of not only making the data available but also sharing it with the broader industry. So this is a very comprehensive document which gives a detailed explanation of where we are. And in terms of apart from procurement, there are always very good training sessions which can be assessed to, first of all, qualify ourselves in order to make sure that where we stand and how we can guide our suppliers towards that journey. Jack was already mentioned, which is one of the best sources that I can always recommend. And then also pushing the suppliers to participate in CDP. And if there is a question or if there is support or guidance needed, then always bringing that support or based on the best practice examples of what we have already learned and then sharing it with the industry.
Great, thanks, Saima. So there's obviously a lot of help out there, and I know we're going to get a lot of questions in from our viewers based on our discussion, so we look forward to looking at those later. For now, though, we must leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in our discussion today and sharing your views. Now, if you are watching this on day 2 of the Green Network Summit, then please do, as I said, send your questions in and we'll answer as many of them as we can in our live Q&A show, and that's coming up later today. Don't forget to view the other panel discussions and keynote interviews in this year's summit. But for now, thanks for watching and goodbye.